Welcome to Mac Discussions, brought to you by The Silhouette and CFMU. My name is Andrew Mrozowski, the editor-in-chief of The Silhouette. Today, I'm joined by Sean Van Koughnett, the Dean of Students for McMaster University, Kim Day, the acting Vice Provost Academic for McMaster University, Della-Vedova, the President of the McMaster Students Union, Nisha Gill, a Level 3 Arts and Science student, and Couper Smith, a Level 2 Mechatronics Engineering student. Today, we'll be discussing McMaster University Return to Campus Plan for the 2021-2022 academic year. It's no secret that COVID-19 has drastically changed our lives, both in the personal and academic sense. With the rising number in COVID vaccination rates, McMaster University, amongst other Ontario universities, is once again becoming a place of in-person activities, both inside and outside of the classroom. Sean, Kim, and Denver, I'd like to invite you all to talk briefly about your roles at McMaster for the students who might not know what you do. So, Sean, if you want to go first.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, as Andrew said, I'm Sean Van Koughnett, Associate Vice President and Dean of Students. I handle a lot of the student services. Sorry, my phone's ringing at an inopportune time. A lot of the student services outside the classroom. So everything from athletics and recreation to the Student Wellness Center, Student Accessibility Services, Indigenous Student Services, the Student Success Center, the Registrar's Office, all those types of things. And so that's where my focus is on a lot of the aspects of student life. Oh, and housing and residence life is another area as well.
Awesome, thanks. And Kim, what about you?
Hey, thanks, Andrew. My name's Kim Dye. I'm the acting Vice Provost faculty. That kind of means there are two groups of folks that I advocate for. So I'm more looking at the students in the classrooms and the course and curriculum. So I oversee and chair the undergraduate council, where we look at new courses, new curriculum, look at policies, certainly look at all of the changes that we've had to implement and anticipate during the pandemic. I work really closely with the associate deans of each of the faculties, who are always advocating for students within their faculties. So a really great group of people to work with. But then also thinking about those interactions between curricular and co-curricular. So Sean and I work together closely in thinking about how one impacts the other as well. But I also work on behalf of faculty members, so our instructors in the classroom, and thinking about the supports that they need to teach well. I oversee the McPherson Institute, which provides resources to all of our faculty members and instructors in the classroom, and thinking about new ways of teaching, and thinking about shifting to online teaching, and thinking about shifting back to in-person teaching, and thinking about TA supports as well.
Awesome, thank you. And Denver.
Denver Della-Vedova. I am the MSU President this year. I run the MSU as a whole, which represents all McMaster full-time students. So a lot of the day-to-day operations, as well as I act as the face of the MSU, work with a lovely board, our GM and staff every day, work with folks, depending what it is, be it services, advocacy. I do a lot of vision and high-level planning as well within the MSU, and a lot of guiding folks on kind of where we're moving through the year.
Awesome. So now that we have a brief description of what everyone does, we can just jump right to it. So I guess my first question for everybody, I guess in a perfect world, what are you hoping campus will look like in the fall? Why don't I hand it off to one of our student panelists first? Nisha, what are you hoping the campus will look like?
I guess I'm just hoping that campus will look maybe not quite normal, but safe and healthy for everyone who has to come to campus, and be it faculty or students or just staff.
Cool. And what about you, Couper?
Yeah, so having not actually been to campus before, because I'm going into my second year, I'm just really excited to get some of those experiences that I maybe missed out on first year. So getting to join some more clubs, getting to get that university experience, I'm really excited for.
Awesome. And then I guess from the university admin side, Sean and Kim, what are you two hoping campus is going to look like?
I can jump in first here if you don't mind, Kim. Yeah, I share our students' hope that, and I think optimism that we're not going to be 100% normal yet, but we will be moving in that direction, and there will be opportunities to be in person, to do some activities, to socialize, to be around your peers, and how we are able to move through the term and the year is going to be somewhat dictated by the pandemic and provincial regulations and things that are outside our control. My desire is to have within those bounds as much activity as we can safely manage on campus, because I think we all recognize how important that is for students. It's a huge part of being a university student, is to be around people, around your peers, around faculty, and to do the activities that you enjoy doing outside of class.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with everybody. I think we have to focus upon health and safety. I think the pandemic still changes every day. We open the newspaper and something new is happening. So we have to be prepared for that and make sure that our community is safe. We have been teaching during the pandemic in some of our programs. We've had permission to teach within our clinical health related programs, and we haven't had any outbreaks on campus. Our learning spaces have been extremely safe. We haven't had any incidents that have occurred. So I think we have a good history around teaching well in this new space. I had said for my 17 years ever at McMaster, student learning doesn't just happen in the classroom. It happens in the conversations from student to student. It happens when you're talking to your peers in a lab. It happens when you're studying together in the library or on campus. It happens in those office hours. So learning happens in so many different ways that really embrace those conversations. So that's what we're really focusing upon in fall, is being able to bring back those really meaningful and deep experiences. Wherever we have the hands-on experiences, we've brought those back, perhaps not to 100%. Maybe we're not meeting as frequently, just to make sure that we're, still acting in a safe way, to make sure that we're still flexible in case anything else happens. We don't want our students' education to be disrupted again. We want to make sure that we can fluidly move from one space to another. But really emphasizing that your lecture might be online, but that doesn't mean that you can't meet with a group and collaborate and put together a project and have those conversations, because that is the meaningful part of a university. You can learn things online. You can open YouTube and learn things. It's the interactions that are important. And those interactions happen in small groups, in the studios, in maker spaces, in labs. They're not happening in the lecture halls. So that's why we're really focusing upon those smaller experiences. And I guess your actual question was, what am I looking forward to? That's what I'm looking forward to, that just the joy that comes from being able to learn with others.
Awesome. What about you, Denver?
It's funny because the way you phrase this, I guess I have two scenarios. The ideal would be somewhat like fall of 2019. I really miss people, miss the bustle around campus. I miss seeing students be able to be students and, partake in everything the university experience has to offer. Obviously, in a more pragmatic, realistic sense, I recognize, we're going to have to follow provincial guidelines. Even if folks are wearing masks, smiles are in the eyes. I'm just really excited in general to see people on campus and have something going this year. And it would be lovely if through the year we could move more towards that 2019-esque way of life.
For sure. And I think that's likely the goal, to get back to that sort of that old normal, I guess. So perfect. I'm going to throw it off to our student panelists. They have a couple questions. So Nisha, take it away.
Thanks, Andrew. So this is, I think we've established a bit of an unprecedented year with nearly 2 years of students who have not yet been to campus or attended in-person classes. What might you say to students who are anxious about returning to campus? And could you speak to the kinds of supports that are being offered to support students' well-being during this transition?
Sure, maybe I can start on this one. So in terms of what I would say to students, and as you've mentioned, there's a couple cohorts now of students who haven't really been on campus. First, whether COVID or not, you'll discover that Max, and even though it's a large university, it's an incredibly caring university, especially for a place this size. Sometimes you don't get that in large institutions, but I think it's in large part it's due to the people here and to the student community itself that really supports each other. I think we've been very conscious, and through the first year or the last academic year, the pandemic, in some ways, we were, if you looked across the board in Ontario, we took probably greater precautions. And I'm not saying this is some people may be critical, some people may be supportive of this, but we essentially closed down our residences, we closed down our athletic facilities. We've always tried to consider and put at the top of the list health and safety, and that hasn't changed. So as we look forward, we've tried to keep our eyes on where are students going with vaccinations? What is their intent? How are they following through on that? We surveyed students, and you all should have received one. And of those who responded, I think 97% who are going into residence said they were intending on being vaccinated, 94% overall. So that's a very high rate. So if you're a student coming to campus, you can expect that the vast majority of your peers are going to be vaccinated. The other provincial regulations, people are going to be masked indoors. We're doing enhanced cleaning through all our facilities. Our facilities operation has upgraded the air filtering system to ensure as much safety with the air quality there as possible. As we're running our services, we're going to take a hybrid approach. So if you would feel more comfortable accessing services online, that will be available to you. At the same time, though, we will have in-person services available for students if that's a preference. So we're trying to cater to the individual needs of students as much as we can. And I think the other thing you can expect is that we will adjust as needed. So whatever September 1st looks like, it's probably going to look different on October 1st and November 1st. There may be adjustments to be made as the pandemic shifts and as we learn what student needs and expectations are. So I think generally our support services are ready for students in both hybrid and in-person formats. I think as a community, we're going to have to continue, as we have been, to try to be as patient with each other as possible, because we're all going through something that none of us have gone through before. And I can tell you that everyone that I've come in contact with is absolutely doing the best they can to adjust. So we're going to get through this okay. And I think students should expect that we're attempting to take their needs and expectations and put those at the forefront of what we're doing.
So maybe I'll jump in a little bit on the academic side as well. So Nisha, as Sean said, I think that the McMaster community is great. I think that we genuinely care about one another. We engage in activities that are mutually beneficial to those on campus, and we engage with our Hamilton community as well. I think we're starting Couper at a really great place. We have lots of folks that really genuinely care about one another and are looking out for each other's interests, and whether that's campus community, Hamilton community, or your community at home as well. In terms of our academic spaces, we are trying to provide as much flexibility as possible so that students can make the best choices for them as well. So we do have a number of courses that are offered in a hybrid or an online environment, so that if you are more comfortable this term taking predominantly online courses or all, that in most programs, not all, but in most, that's possible. So you can make a decision that's best for you and your community and your family. We've also updated all of our or most of our large lecture halls, not all of our classrooms, but the larger lecture halls with Echo 360, so that they in-class lectures can be automatically captured and then shared with students. I think that's good for many reasons. I think pedagogically it makes sense. And this is something the MSU has been really advocating for a long time. It provides flexibility for student learning that allows them to review lectures, allows them to miss something and not fall behind. I think it's a good practice in general. But during the pandemic, it does allow for our students to make best choices for them. That if they're more comfortable at any point during the term in staying home, they can go in and use those recorded lectures in place of coming into a lecture. It also means that when we say, if you're feeling ill, stay home, that you can do it without feeling like you're taking a risk to your own academics. We have the MSAF system in place. Couper, you probably didn't get a lot of chance to use that in your first year because wasn't quite as relevant when people were learning from home. But there are going to be instances where an MSAF doesn't make sense. It's just, I was exposed, or I was in a risky environment, or I feel a little bit ill. I don't know that it's COVID, but I don't feel well. And I want to make sure that myself and my community is safe. So I'm going to stay home. And so by recording and capturing lectures, the student can say, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to go to my 11:30 lecture because I'm not feeling well. I'm going to just watch it instead. And so I think that those resources make individual students feel more comfortable about their decisions. And then all of your community feel comfortable that you're going to make the right decisions as well.
I could jump on this as well. I'd say first off, if a student was feeling anxious about the return, I would say that they're not alone. I think we all, to some degree, all for our own personal reasons, feel that a little bit. That being said, from the MSU side, we're trying to do our best to ensure this transition back goes smoothly for those that are returning back, and really trying to work on the orientation events with the university, safety protocols, as Sean mentioned in some of our spaces, as well as community building and our service offerings. So far for our operations, we are opening the Food Collective Center, EFERT, and SWAT on campus, and those were the only services that we had to kind of shut down through the pandemic, just because they're mostly in person. As well, all of our other services continue to operate in an online format. So we provide 22 in total, so that leaves another 19 that will be continuing online and possibly moving in person as the semester goes on. And that includes a possible return of our peer support services in person, but they're always offered online. They can be through our website or through any of their own websites or pages.
Okay, that's all very good to hear. Thank you.
And now, Couper, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. So all three of you actually kind of briefly mentioned this in your talk before, so maybe just expand a little bit on it. But compared to like some of the other universities across the province, McMaster is offering a little bit less in-person learning opportunities. Just wondering what were the reasons for this. If things do get better, will students be able to go midway through the fall semester, or is this kind of like set in stone just to be consistent?
Yeah, so Couper, I can begin to answer that. So is it set in stone? I would say that any course that is designated as online or virtual is not going to flip to in-person in the middle of term. Students have made decisions about where they're living, about how they're commuting, that we don't want to, or not commuting, that we don't want to throw at them in the middle of the term. So something is online or virtual, it's going to stay that way. Will there be, so why did we make some of these decisions? You're right, at the beginning I did allude to the fact that we really focused upon what are the experiences that need to happen in person, that are most meaningful in person. And so we identified those. All the associate deans went back to their departments and said, okay, we're not going 100% back. What are the priorities? What do you really want to have your students back doing? And so they put together that list of their priorities. We also recognized that there was actually a lot of learning that came from the pandemic. We want to get back to something. I'm not entirely sure it's normal. I'm not entirely sure normal was perfect. Sitting in a lecture hall with 600 students is not necessarily the best way to learn. I can't find a single research paper that says you will learn best if you're shoulder to shoulder with 600 other students. That doesn't mean that there aren't great lectures, that people don't teach well in those spaces, but I wouldn't say it's the best. That means that we can learn from what's worked well. We've had a series of instructor panels over the last 18 months where our faculty members came and talked about what they were doing in the pandemic online environment. And some of them were incredibly passionate and excited about what worked really well. So teaching in a Zoom or a Teams environment, they found that there were some students that talked more and participated more than they ever had before because they were more comfortable perhaps just in the chat, adding their opinion. They were more comfortable talking with their cameras off. They were more able to participate in small groups in the Teams or Zoom breakout rooms. They just found that there was actually more engagement in some of their courses, not less. And so they don't want to lose that. That might not mean an either or in person or online. It might mean we have to find something that's in the middle, but they really wanted to keep those spaces that were more accessible and more inclusive for more students. So I think we do want to keep that. And so I think we'll still find, that there are instructors this year that that actually did choose to teach online because they found it worked better for their course. If it's 3 hours of lecture, having students commute back and forth for 50 minutes and sitting in a lecture hall with hundreds of other students versus engaging in meaningful conversations that they could really control a little bit differently in the online environment seemed like the better choice. So while it might appear that McMaster shifted more towards a hybrid or an online rather than in person, I think you will find if you look down at the data that the in-person pieces are the labs and tutorials, the small group experiences. And I think that you will also find that that our decisions weren't based upon a cutoff. We didn't just say anything larger than 150 online, anything smaller than 150 in person. We made individual decisions based upon how an instructor teaches at their best and how students learn at their best in these spaces. So it took a little bit more work. It meant that we were doing this work months ago. It meant that students could enroll in their courses earlier than at some universities. But I think I'm actually very happy with where we landed because it was part of a discussion that was around how we teach best and how we learn well.
That's awesome. Thank you. No, I really appreciate that. That's really cool.
Awesome. Nisha?
Yeah, just to clarify, are physical distancing measures still going to be in place on campus? I think this was mentioned in the Return to McMaster Oversight Committee's final report, and I think it was also discussed at the last Back to Mac town hall. However, in the latest COVID update on July 19th, suggested otherwise, I think stating the university continues to work with public health partners who have advised that our planning for the fall can be done without the need for physical distancing.
Yeah, so as Sean said earlier, Nisha, we really are taking guidance from public health. We're not going to do anything that is contradictory to what we're allowed to do because they're making decisions based upon what their knowledge of the pandemic around new risks, around dissipating risks. We have scheduled classrooms based upon pre-pandemic capacities, or in some cases larger, which means that there is no 2-meter distance between students. So we are scheduling now, we have scheduled towards the absence of that physical distancing requirement. As Sean said, we're still going to require masks in the indoor spaces. That is because that's what makes sense from what public health has told us locally, from what the province is providing guidance on. It also does make sense from the research. Research is messy. It's going to change. It's going to change depending upon what is happening locally as well as globally. But right now, the spread of the COVID-19 through aerosol dissipation is best monitored and controlled by masking and by excellent ventilation. The distancing, if you're sitting in a room with a handful of people, the masks will slow down the aerosol, the ventilation will get rid of it, but the distancing isn't going to make a huge difference. Again, this is according to our guidelines from our province, but it is also consistent with the research that's currently present. But Sean, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it well. And one of the overarching points here is that we're all responding to shifting circumstances and direction. And I think not only students, but university administration as well, we're constantly trying to understand where things are going. And so I think that's just an expectation that we have to continue to have as a community, is that things can and will shift. One of the things that maybe personally I don't expect to shift that much is masking, at least for the fall term. But I think as we've seen as the summer has progressed, I think some of these regulations are lifting more quickly than I thought they might. I think the vaccinations rates have gone up faster than what many of us thought they might earlier in the spring. So I think those are really positive signs, even though there is some concern around the Delta variant and its transmissibility. I think we're going in the right direction.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
I just have a follow-up. Would other organizations within the university, such as MSU, hospitality services, still be allowed to say that they want social distancing in their spaces, or do they have to be consistent with university policies and stances on things such as physical distancing, if masks do lift, if they still want to implement that. Because I do know that there are still some folks who are hesitant about kind of migrating back into, again, to throw out that word, that normal. So what about things like that?
So I can touch on that with the MSU end. As the MSU, like we all can go beyond the university guidelines to protect staff and student staff if folks are interested. Those conversations I'm sure will be had as we move through the fall and possibly see some of the loosening of those guidelines. I know from even in this conversation that it appears that masks are here to stay for a while, so some of those guidelines are likely going to be around. But we will also be cognizant of what our service provides, or what the MSU space is. If we're looking at food spaces, obviously folks need to take a mask off to eat. So there will be some looking at what a space looks like and making decisions based on that as we move through the semester. But for the most part, I see us being fairly in line with the university on where they're at, as I think there's a hope to return to fairly normal as well as we can and as soon as possible.
So Andrew, sorry, or Nisha, now I can't, Andrew, who asked the question. So are you also asking just around in teaching spaces as well? Would there be, so I think it's a sticky question. I would say consistency is best, right? You don't want students moving from one classroom to another, the rules changing. I think whenever the rules change, then you have a real difficulty with implementing and enforcing those policies. And then you have a situation where who's enforcing the policies. And I always worry whenever you have a policy that you have to make sure that someone's enforcing it, or else there's no bother in having it there. So if you're in a space where students are making the new rules, then we're asking them to enforce it. And I just feel like that's always a position where unconscious bias unfolds, where certain groups are excluded. I think that there are risks associated with that. So I like the idea of there being a consistent policy, even if McMaster's consistent policy is actually a little bit above what perhaps public health has told us to do. So I think that we want to, and I think it's so much easier to enforce a policy if McMaster says everybody's wearing a mask indoor. Then you walk into a classroom, and if someone's not wearing a mask, then the instructor doesn't teach. That it's a safety violation, just like a fire regulation policy. So I think it's easier to say, this is what I can do because this is a McMaster policy. It's in alignment with public health policy. I think when you begin to have different regulations inside spaces, it becomes trickier. That said, will we have some distinct things? I think we will. There are still some there's still activities that are riskier. When we're thinking about choir, when we're thinking about wind instruments, we might find that distancing there is going to be important because you can't wear a mask when you're playing, a wind instrument or when you're singing. So we might replace some of those precautions. But I think that the key is that there are, in these indoor spaces, there are multiple precautions, that it is ventilation plus masking plus a very high rate of vaccination, even if the distancing is gone. If you have to remove one of those, if it's the masking that has to be removed, then add back in the spacing. So I think that there will be some variation, but I do want to be cautious around that because, again, I think consistency is more likely to lead to people feeling comfortable with knowing what they're supposed to do.
Totally. Thank you. Couper.
So Kim, I apologize. I feel like all my questions are targeted towards you here. So you've already spoken a little bit about this, but what would the protocol be if a student or faculty member did test positive during an in-person component? Would McMaster be very proactive in their approach? Would things be shut down really quickly if an outbreak occurs? How will students hear about it? What's sort of that plan that's going to happen if that were the case?
Yeah, so I will ask Sean to add on to this as well, because we do have these protocols in place already, that anyone who is on campus and receives a positive test, we do ask that they report it to campus. There is an online tool for doing that. And in that online tool, you indicate when symptoms began occurring, if they did, when you tested positive, and then all of the spaces that you were in on campus. And so we're still going to ask folks to do that. We don't report all of the details because there are health and privacy concerns, but McMaster has been reporting when there are incidents on campus. And so I have every expectation that we continue with that transparency. The spaces that the people have been in are immediately cleaned. Now, there's obviously a bit of a lag between reporting and when you were in those spaces, but they are still cleaned. We do have increased cleaning happening across campus as well. So we believe in terms of the safety of the spaces that we'll still be in a good position. In terms of it being a particular class, so you're in a lab room and somebody reports that they were ill. Again, I think we need to alert folks who are exposed in the same way that we have been with the apps that we've been using. If you've been proximal to someone who has been ill, it turns up on one of your apps. So we are encouraging students to use those apps that the province has provided, because I think they do provide a purpose in terms of, this kind of low-level tracking of exposure so that people can test if they feel that they have been at risk or have been exposed. So those protocols are all in place. Sean, but have I missed any of the steps in those protocols?
No, I don't think so. I don't know if it's changed dramatically over the process that we put in place since the beginning of the pandemic. I might add that given that we'll have students in residence this year, whereas we had very few last year, if we were, for instance, to have a positive test on a residence floor, we've got, and we'll treat it case by case to determine what testing might be appropriate, but we'll have the ability to come in very quickly and do testing of, say, a residence floor where there might have been a positive test. Likewise, another environment where there's more intensive contact between students would be among student athletes. So if we had a positive test of a student on one of the teams, we might do increased testing there to determine whether there's been any spread. The contact tracing has always been and will continue to be done through Hamilton Public Health. So that's their responsibility, is to do that activity, but we have the ability to come in and do some testing, and also for certain to make sure that those who should be isolating while we're awaiting those results are in fact doing that. In particular in the residence environment and with our student athletes.
And just as a follow-up, and again, I think this has been touched on a little bit, but if a student tests positive and does have to self-isolate from the in-person component, or Kim, as you said earlier, if they're just not feeling well and they don't want to put anyone at risk, will there be guidelines on a policy for COVID accommodations for in-person classes and assessments? Because I know you said that the larger spaces are going to have Echo 360. Thinking, what about the smaller spaces? What if there's some faculty members who aren't utilizing it as much as the university would like them to? What kinds of plans are in place for students there?
Yeah, so thanks, Andrew. So we are definitely overall, and I think not just in response to the pandemic, but overall moving towards more universal design in our teaching, recognizing that students have complex lives and things come up that, are work related, that are family related. A lot of our students have, elder care, they have childcare, they have things that make their lives complicated, and they might not be able to turn up for these things. So universal design really incorporates lots of things around more flexible deadlines and grace periods and handing things in tutorials and labs that, 5 out of 6 are graded, so that if you miss one, it's not going to affect your grade, that there are ways to catch up on the material. Certainly we have in hand lots of alternatives for online labs and tutorials, because we did that for a full year. So there are those backup plans in place. And so we're encouraging instructors to be empathetic, to be understanding, to provide those options wherever possible. I think that, it will be complicated if you're asked to quarantine and it's for a week or 2 weeks, that you're missing a lot of things. So we are encouraging students to reach out and to communicate with their instructors if they're missing a significant amount of in-person work, so that those alternatives can be provided. Are there policies around that? Again, policies don't always accomplish what we think they're going to accomplish. We're providing the supports and resources to our faculty to do this. We're giving them the reasons for doing this. There might be some classes where the in-person component is absolutely essential. And maybe I'll go back to some of those health clinical examples where we had some in-person learning this past year because the students couldn't graduate from, let's say, a nursing program without some very specific in-person components. So if a student is missing a lot of those, I would suggest that they talk to an academic advisor in that program to understand how they can make up for those essential in-person components, either in this term or it might have to be in another term. So there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to your question, but I think that we have established some really best practices that our instructors are employing.
Awesome. So that kind of wraps up student panelist questions. Now we're going to move to our student submitted questions. So we sent out a Google form across CFMU and the Silhouette social medias. We posted on the McMaster subreddit. And I don't think this will be much of a surprise, but the largest question was about vaccinations on campus. So a lot of students seem to be concerned that the university was quite hard on their stance at the start of the summer that students and residents will not be required to get vaccinated, but rather encouraged to get vaccinated. But then the flip to now students are required to be vaccinated to go into residence. So some students are wondering what was the change, or sorry, what was the reason for that change, especially so close to the semester start date?
Sure, that's a great question. And so you're right. At the beginning, we did not require vaccinations, and then it shifted. And what some of the circumstances that changed included the news from the ministry that it was likely that some of the regulations would be loosened sooner than we thought. So now we were faced with a situation where in the beginning of the calendar year and as we moved through the spring, we anticipated that it was probably going to be difficult for students to do much gathering. So our common areas in the residence would likely be either limited or closed. Now we're looking at a situation where there's increased gathering. The Delta variant was another factor where when we began discussing the situation, the Delta wasn't even in existence, or we were just beginning to learn about it. We've since learned more about the transmissibility of that variant and some of the risks associated with it. We did the survey, and 97% of the students coming into residence who responded said that they were intending on getting the vaccine. So that's a great rate. I should also mention that the mandate, there will be exceptions to that mandate. We don't have many. At this point, we've got less than 1% of the students who are coming into residence who have requested an exception or an accommodation based on a medical or religious reason. So there will be some who are unvaccinated, but it's going to be a very small number. And so what we're looking at is a very small number of students who were not intending to get vaccinated, but who are now being required to do so. And we are trying to ensure what is the safest possible environment that we can provide for our students and residents in that congregate setting, while still enabling students who have reasons based on medical or religious reasons to opt out of that. And so I think we're striking the right balance there. And it's also in line with the vast majority of universities in Ontario now have a vaccine mandate for residences. There's still, I think, a few who might not, but it's the majority now who have a mandate.
So I guess as a follow-up, another question that a lot of students have been asking for us to share with you folks is, why hasn't that been expanded to all students and faculty who are coming onto campus? Why is McMaster requiring everybody to get vaccinated if they want to go into some of the spaces on campus?
Yeah, so Andrew, I can certainly begin to touch on that. I think that vaccine mandates are a provincial mandate. I think that we have to appeal to that. I think also, again, I'll indicate that this is sticky, right? If you're going into a restaurant and you're talking about 30 people going into an indoor space, you can check for vaccines, sure. You're talking about 30,000 students going onto an open campus with multiple entrances onto that campus. So when you say you're requiring a vaccine for students coming onto campus, What do you even mean? Do you mean that they're not allowed to cross Sterling Gate without having a vaccine? Are they not allowed to go into indoor spaces? Are they not allowed to be in outdoor spaces? What do any of those pieces mean? So I think that actually implementing a policy turns out to be much more complicated. If we were to have a policy, we could say that if you're going into an in-person classroom that you have to be vaccinated, but are we going to tell students that are in a hybrid or an online class that they can't be on campus or that they can't be enrolled in those classes? Well, no, I mean, they're not on campus. They should be allowed to enroll in those spaces. But who's going to stop them from going into the in-person classroom? I'm not going to ask instructors to do that. I'm not going to ask TAs to do that. So I think it just becomes, again, implementing the policy becomes very, very difficult. And I think it then again has the risk of othering people and saying, you look like you don't have a vaccine, so I'm going to ask you if you have one. I think that's always a risky route to go down. That doesn't mean that I don't think 100% of our students, if they can be vaccinated, and faculty and staff should be. I think that is a communal goal that we should have. But we're pretty good. I mean, as Sean indicated, over 90% of our students have already indicated that they expect to be vaccinated. Would having a mandate get us much above 90%? I don't know. I don't know if it would, right? Still, we have students that are on campus, off campus in these different spaces. It might not actually shift that number. So I think it's a little bit of these two pieces. One, I think we have to appeal to the policies that are coming down from the province around mandatory vaccinations. And then I think we have to think about how we would implement that on our campus as well.
With that, we also have students wondering about congregating on campus and just what that might look like for club meetings or study spaces, or having guests in residence even, or just grabbing a bite with friends somewhere on campus.
Yeah, there will be the ability to do all of that. It might not be 100% what it was like pre-COVID. So for instance, student groups. And again, the theme here is we will reassess as the term goes on. But to begin with, and there'll be guidelines coming out hopefully later this week, but we're going to be focused on on-campus student group events, ones that don't involve alcohol or travel. So there will be some limitations. And then there's the provincial regulations of I believe it's 25 indoors and 100 outdoors that we'd still have to abide by, masking indoors and masking outdoors if you can't maintain distancing. So all those things still apply. So I think that's a really positive development that we'll reassess. So if the province changes its regulations or when they do, then we'll reassess what we should be doing with student group events. Study spaces, the libraries will be open. And I know this isn't study, but just in terms of other spaces, we haven't mentioned the athletic facilities will be open. Mosque will be open. All those environments will be open. You're still going to have to wear masks in most of those environments. Athletics being an exception where there's some variations there when you're working out. But you're going to have the opportunity to do all those things when you're on campus. So there will be some semblance of student life beyond the classroom. Again, not 100%, but we're moving in the right direction.
On that, from the MSU end, we are working on just what our club requirements look like for events, just to ensure that we have some safety protocols around COVID and space bookings. And those will vary and change fairly flexibly with the province and the institution as we share the space.
So I guess for the last question, maybe a bit more of an optimistic question. So in an ideal world, what does winter semester look like? How does McMaster plan for that? How do students plan for that when there's still so much uncertainty just about the fall semester? Like, what are you hoping that winter is going to look like?
I'll be optimistic too, Couper. I think that we're heading in the right direction. Locally, nationally, globally, I think it's slow, but that's a different question. I think right now we have scheduled our classes into rooms as we would do any other winter. So we have spaces available for all of the courses, again, just like we would have had 2 years ago in winter. So we're set up for that. That does allow us the flexibility that things change, that we can move some of those lectures back into online, but we're prepared for having those things in person. So I think right now our planning is optimistic, that we expect to have close to normal capacity on all of our teaching and learning spaces. I still expect that there'll be some learning that will have happened where we might see more blended classrooms that take advantage of both of those spaces. But that, again, will be for pedagogical reasons. And I think that is a second form of optimism that we're looking ahead towards.
Yeah, I think from outside the classroom, we'll continue to be able to, in an ideal world, we'd be able to get back to what is essentially normal in terms of student events. Where we will have a varsity sports season starting in the fall. There may be some limitations on spectators, that we'll have the full slate of intramurals that, I hope that we have all those things in place for winter, that we will have in place for the fall, but with even fewer restrictions on them. So it'll be hopefully student life as you'd expect it to be, maybe with some masking in there is probably still maybe realistic for the winter.
I think on that as well, just based on some unsureness in the fall, there is the bright side of, I know some events might possibly run in a winter season rather than fall season, just if restrictions look better from the MSU standpoint. So there's a lot to look forward to there, assuming that restrictions are lessened at that point, we have the space ability to do those events.
Couper and Nisha, for you two, what does that winter semester look like in your ideal world?
I mean, I think just, again, to use the word normal, but just closer and closer to at least what maybe fall 2019 looked like or winter 2020 looked like at the beginning. Just slowly getting back to that kind of sense of normalcy.
Yeah, just the normal. As I said, haven't been to campus, so even the fall is looking really optimistic for me. I'm really excited just to get to experience those things. So honestly, if we just keep getting better and better and better, I'm very excited for the winter.
A big thank you to everyone who submitted a question for this video. And also I'd like to thank Sean Van Koughnett, Kim Day, Denver Della-Vedova, Nisha Gill, and Couper Smith for being a part of this discussion. Just because the video is over doesn't mean that the conversation is over. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below, and stay locked to www.thesil.ca and 93.3 CFMU for more information about the campus reopening plan. I'm Andrew Mrozowski, the editor-in-chief of The Silhouette, signing off.